Over 2,000 years ago, two disillusioned disciples walked along a dusty road to Emmaus. They had just witnessed Jesus, their friend and leader, whom they hoped to be the Messiah, suffer a gruesome death by crucifixion. Doubt, fear, and uncertainty clouded their conversation as they journeyed home, questioning the future. Until something miraculous happened. The risen Jesus appeared and answered their questions. Today, many young Catholics step onto college campuses with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed of faith given to them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, scheduled to be released in the summer of 2021, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. To pre-order your copy and help spread the word about the book, visit patchworkheart.org. The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hello and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. You can learn about us on our website at nonnatus.org. Thank you so much for joining us for another great podcast series for families in crisis. And this one always will go live on the last Thursday of each month. And this one will be airing at the end of July in 2021. And my name is Ann DeSantis. I'm the director of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. And I'm joined by our board president. It's Mickey Kelly. We've done other podcast series before with the foundation. And tonight's topic, because we're doing this 4-part series on the Cardinal Virtues of the Catholic Church. And as we talk about that, as it relates to families who are in crisis, because this is our Families in Crisis podcast. And we're also going to talk about the opposite side of the virtues, which would be the vices that are related to these cardinal virtues. So first, I want to welcome my wonderful guest and the president of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, Mickey Kelly. Mickey, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you. It's always great that we're tag teaming on something like this. So for sure.
It really is, Mickey. Thank you so much. And thanks for the work that you do with the foundation. I also want to invite people that if you haven't heard our 4-part series that we did on the 10 Commandments, to definitely go on to our YouTube channel and listen to it, because it was a really good series. And all you need to do is just go to Philly Nonnatus on YouTube and also check out that playlist for the 10 Commandments series. So why don't we start out with Mickey, if we could. I'm going to read a little bit to you all about what the virtue of prudence, what it means, and where you can learn more about it. And so if you go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which you can go to online, you can just look it up online, and you can go to Part 3, which is Life in Christ, Section 1, Man's Vocation, Life in the Spirit, Chapter 1, The Dignity of the Human Person. And it's Article 7. And I'm just going to start out by reading the first couple paragraphs there, which I think will give us an idea of what virtue is. It's number 1803 in this section of the Catechism. It says, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. A virtue is a habitual and firm disposition to do the good. It allows the person not only to perform good acts, but to give the best of himself. The virtuous person tends toward the good with all his sensory and spiritual powers. He pursues the good and chooses it in concrete actions. And then it says underneath in small print that the goal of a virtuous life is to become like God. Why don't we start there, Mickey? What do the virtues mean to you in your own life? And what can you teach our listeners about virtue?
Well, I feel like the virtues, they're something that we really need now more than ever. I mean, across all levels. And I was thinking of that quote from, I think if you just quote that a moment ago, and of course with our topic this evening, prudence, especially, I was like telling you this a little while ago, and actually I was just thinking back on a recent pickle I was in with my finances. They remember I was paying, medical bills, and then I was running a baseball pool to raise money, of course. When in reality, I was taking on too much that I didn't really stop and think, to take the caution, which is another way of saying, you're prudent. And I think that's something that a lot of us really have lacked. And I'm not saying who and what and what circumstances, but one of the things that, with prudence is you are careful with how you do this, how you do that, because sometimes you just never know if there's something that happens that's like out of your control. But let's say, for example, maybe you get hit with a medical bill that was not covered, with your health insurance, and you're just like, holy cow. But thankfully there are options where you can spread out the money, so that way there you don't have to like pay the whole enchilada in one shot. Like, maybe you have to understand you have other expenses to deal with at from time, such as the utilities, your subscriptions, assuming we still have those, like with Netflix and Disney Plus, among other things. And prudence does not just have to do with money. It also to do with things with like how the way you act and the way you speak. One of my favorite quotes actually is from Sun Tzu, which he wrote very famed literature known as The Art of War. He says that a sovereign cannot raise an army because he's enraged, nor can a general fight because he is resentful. For while in anger many may again be happy, and resentful man again be pleased, a state that has perished cannot be restored, nor can the dead be brought back to life. Therefore, the enlightened ruler is prudent, and a good general is warned against rash actions. What Sun Tzu reminds us is the good leader, and even leaders, good leaders in general, they have to, make the right decision. So that way they're, but for generals, they want to make sure that they choose their targets wisely. Otherwise, they could suffer a very substantial loss of troop morale or military strength. The same goes with an athlete. They have to do let's say the manager gives a sign to his best hitter. You have runners at second and third with less than one out. You have a choice. Do you want to tell the hitter to go ahead and go for, the power hit to knock in both runs, or give them a sign where you tell them to hit a fly ball to the outfield that would just knock in at least one run? And let's say maybe you're down a run in the ninth inning, but you want to keep the game going. Like, those are decisions you have to make. That you also have to, that would make a difference between victory or defeat. That's kind of like how I really think of prudence as well, when we don't have to really put the religious aspect to it. But it's also like prudence could also be something that we have to practice daily, not just as a virtue, but also with how we act, with the way we carry ourselves, and with the decisions we make in our everyday life.
Oh, well said. Thank you. Because, I think the more we ponder this, talk about it, and really try to unpack it, it's going to help not only you and me, Mickey, right? But it's going to help the people that are listening to us and trying to get some help. Because as I said at the beginning, that this podcast is for, families and individuals who are in crisis. And who better than them needs to exercise that prudence, right? When you're going through some kind of a really rough time in your life, and you're thinking, my goodness, I want to do what God wants, but I'm just not sure. Well, that's when praying for and asking God to help you exercise prudence and good decisions makes such a big, huge impact on that. So I'm going to talk right now and read a little bit more about the virtues, the human virtues, and then go right into prudence. So the human virtues, according to the Catechism number 1804, are firm attitudes, stable dispositions, habitual perfections of intellect and will that govern our actions, order our passions, and guide our conduct according to reason and faith. They make it possible, ease, self-mastery, and joy in leading a morally good life. The virtuous man is he who freely practices the good. The moral virtues are acquired by human effort. They are not the fruit, they are the fruit and seed of morally good acts. They dispose all the powers of the human being for communion with divine love. Let's talk about that before we move on to prudence. So I don't know if you had anything to say about that, because to me, what I'm reading here is that it is a, quote, human effort. It's not something that you just kind of snap your fingers and you're going to be a prudent person, right? Or a virtuous person. You got to work at it, right?
I concur, actually. I mean, you think the metaphor I could really offer on this one, and would be the athletes. Well, we're actually, I don't know if by the time we have this broadcast, but we have the Olympics approaching, or it will probably come and go by the time people listen to this. And the athletes, they have a very schedule. Like, let's face it, they're not going to get that gold medal by just like slacking off or whatever. Like, they have training for most of their schedules that, they have to do things such as they have to work out, they have team meetings, they have to watch tapes, of course, to prepare themselves. And they also have to understand that this, like, the sport is not really walk in the park, because face it, they're going to go up against talent that are probably better than them in another country. And they have to really establish the discipline they need in order for them to win the gold medal, to get the silver or even the bronze. If they want to be the best, they have to beat the best. And for a minute, and across the board too with athletes, they have to understand things like, should they take, of course, I still recall the days when I was in junior high and, of course, high school, where the whole steroids thing was coming to light, especially with the congressional hearings. I'm sure many baseball fans may remember the days where popular sluggers, even pitchers, were actually subpoenaed, about their usage of these things that actually they don't realize that it could destroy their body little by little, when taking them. And in a sense too, like, what we see here is, like, are they willing to work hard and achieve whatever their goals are to eventually be, the world's greatest? And let's face it, I would much rather be eating bacon and eggs as opposed to taking things that could do some harm to my body. And of course, I still also want to train with the best to help me beat the best.
Now that makes sense, because when you think about that in terms of who we are as Catholics, right? We have some people who love us dearly and pray for us, and they're the saints, right? And they're praying for us all the time. And so there's a real power that when you have your own patron saint, or if you have saints that you really love, that you can ask them to help you, and in the terms of virtuousness and trying to make good decisions when it comes to the virtues, right? Let me read a little bit more about this, Mickey. So now we're going to talk about the cardinal virtues. So 4 virtues play a pivotal role and accordingly are called cardinal. All the others are grouped around them. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Now, I will say we're going to read about and talk about all of those in these 4 podcast series. If anyone loves righteousness, wisdom's labors are virtues, for she teaches temperance and prudence, justice, and courage. These virtues are praised under other names in many passages of scripture. So So I'm gonna say them again, Mickey, just to see if you have anything to say about them. So there again, they are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. So what do you think about those virtues, and how have they affected your own life?
Well, I think one of temperance is another way. I always think of the groups that were actually surfacing around the time where prohibition of alcohol was kind of like taking the whole, like, taking this by force in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Of course, the women at the time that were part of these groups, they are not the women that we they're not the feminist group that we kind of see today. Like, these feminists, like, they were somewhat, like, they were caring about, the environment and like all these things like that, such as, prohibition of alcohol. And, granted, it wasn't, perfect, so to speak, but, of course they were, persecuted and all things like that. But to go back on topic, temperance too, it's like you're controlling all the unruly passions that are surrounded by you, so that will help you avoid the near occasion of sin. Of course, we already talked about prudence, which St. Thomas Aquinas called it the queen of all virtues. Justice, I think a lot of people seem to kind of forget the true meaning of justice, where, people say things like, oh, reproductive justice or, social justice. But the sad part is people don't understand that justice, or I like to call it fair treatment, which, of course, you do want to see someone get a fair trial. You do want to see someone face the music for the violent or the criminal actions they have taken, whether it's like directly towards you or indirectly. Now, and of course, the other virtue you even mentioned too, Anne, was courage. And we hear the theme of courage many times in the Bible to some degree. And as a matter of fact, 365 times in the Bible, we hear these three words: be not afraid. And that even was a battle cry from St. John Paul the Great throughout his 28 years of his papacy. He even echoed those words, so do not be afraid. And even also too with fortitude, and of course St. Paul even mentioned this quite a few times in his letters, such as the one you kind of mentioned that was taken from the Catechism. And courage, it's one of my favorite things, that quotes of courage, is actually from one of the great Hollywood legends known as John Wayne, just in case anyone's offended from California. But he would say courage is, being scared, but you do it anyway. And he really has a point, because let's face it, there are times like I would get scared, but I have to do it. Even Ernest Hemingway even said, courage is grace under pressure. And boy, he is so right. Another favorite quote of mine about courage is from Plato. Courage is knowing what not to fear. And I think in a sense too, that Plato knows that courage is the antidote to a culture that is oppressed by fear.
Really good points. And I'm glad you brought up Plato and also St. John Paul II, because when it comes to courage, boy, that's great advice. I mean, it couldn't get any better than that. And it's 365 times, as you said, in scripture, to be not afraid. And so keep an eye, because we are going to be doing a whole podcast on that later on, because tonight we're going to focus on the prudence and how important is prudence.
Prudence. I think of a Beatles song.
That's right. That's right. So let me read a little bit more about prudence in the Catechism. It's under number 1806. If you want to look it up, it says that prudence is the virtue that disposes practical reason to discern our true good in every circumstance and to choose the right means of achieving it. The prudent man looks where he's going. Keep sane and sober for your prayers. Prudence is right reason in action, writes St. Thomas Aquinas following Aristotle. It is not to be confused with timidity or fear, nor with duplicity or dissimulation. It is called, now I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly, Aruga Virtuum, the character of the virtues. It guides the other virtues by setting rule and measure. It is prudence that immediately guides the judgment of conscience. The prudent man determines and directs his conduct in accordance with his just judgment. With the help of this virtue, we apply moral principles to particular cases without error and overcome doubts about the good to achieve and the evil to avoid. I think that's a good point at the very end. It says the good to achieve and the evil to avoid, because isn't that really a big part of what prudence is?
For sure.
Yeah, it's in our daily lives, because we make decisions regarding our family, our job, our relationships, our safety, right? I mean, let's talk a little bit about those areas.
Mhm.
And I don't know, Mickey, I mean, feel free if you want to share anything in your own life, but I think that for me as a parent, that's been a place where I've had to really exercise prudence, because when you're raising children, and I'm going to make a shout out to those families who are in crisis and the people that are listening that are going through some kind of a rough time, is that I think when it comes to your kids and your family, that exercising prudence is an important thing.
Absolutely. Well, of course, too, I think too, with parents, especially when it comes to divorce, actually, Anne, is, you have to be careful how you speak of the person, whether it's whether you want to, like, of course, you don't want to, like, gossip about people, spread lies or whatever. And you also have to think, like, how are you going to address that person as well? Such as, like, do you want to act, you want to act, malicious towards that person? Or do you want to, extend that, like, act a little charitable, not just by your actions, but also with your speech?
Yeah, exactly. Because it is very important when it comes to people affected by divorce and separation that there is a prudence in our conversations, aren't there? And there's a prudence when it comes to what we communicate about others to other people. And especially when it comes to people affected by divorce and separation, when you're talking about an ex-spouse or something like that, or when you're talking to your kids about other family members and you're telling them stories about things that are happening in the family, we have to have a prudence. And I don't think that just goes for family life. I think that goes for a lot of different areas of life. Don't you think?
Well, and you did mention a moment ago that you also have to be careful how you talk to your coworkers, even, like, your managers, like, well, someone that's, like, above you, let's say, like, in the chain of command or something. Like, do you want to, like, give them an attitude, so to speak, or would you rather, just, bite your tongue and offer, like, to be, like, offer to be, a good employee, so to speak?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
last thing you want is handed a the pink slip, I like to call it, or whether it's, like, physically, or kind of like a verbal pink slip, saying that, like, if you're not going to give me the right attitude for work, you're done.
Yeah. And isn't this where prudence comes in?
For sure.
Because it affects our whole day. It affects who we talk to in the morning, which would be our family, right? Or whoever you happen to be in a living situation with, your family, most likely. It affects your work. It affects people that you might go to church with and that you meet when you go to church gatherings or settings. It affects your other extended relationships, whether it's extended family, whether it's neighbors, right? We got to be prudent. And we have to remember that what we say and what we do does affect other people's lives. I would say. What do you think about that? I do think that those right decisions don't just affect us. And so we have to keep that in mind as well.
Well, absolutely. And also too, like we also have to keep in mind as well, like we have to set a positive example to others, whether it's the coworkers or even our family.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
coworker, let's say like we have like, let's say you have new coworkers or whatever, you have to set the standard high.
Yeah, because it's not just, if you think about it, it's our relationship with God, which of course he's always watching and knows what we're doing and he cares. But it's also how our decisions make an impact on other people, right? The way that we talk, the way that we live, the way that we think, the way that we communicate is all important. Why don't we talk about, and I know we talked a little bit about this before the podcast started, how does it affect, do you think, money decisions as well? That's an important part, isn't it?
Well, and I think, well, I kind of touched on this earlier in the podcast, but absolutely it does, because sometimes you just never know what could happen. So you can't just like, so it's that, for example, I was going through a really crazy period of, paying, medical expenses, a copay that, well, thankfully I have, I had medical insurance, but for some reason it wasn't kicking in, that I was paying 1 week $50, another week I was paying $100. And then I actually had a bit of I'll be a little vulnerable about this, but of course, especially struggling with mental illness for so many years, I have had a couple of near meltdowns, and I was just like really out of sync, that I wasn't careful with how I was spending my money, especially in the midst of writing the checks out and using my debit card, to the point where you're looking at overdraft fees at a negative balance in your account and be like, oh no, that kind of thing. Even like, you kind of shed like, and of course, it kind of throws the mood off too, especially, with like my ordeal right now, especially with the injuries I sustained back in, the springtime, that, of course I had to be really careful, especially, especially when I have like $100 a month going into my retirement, a subscription that's expiring before the summer's over, for a class to learn to be a Catholic gentleman, so to speak, kind of thing, which I'm taking now through a friend that I met through his sister, actually, who's running this like man school. So I'm learning things like the traits, the characteristics of being like, a God-fearing man, which is very needed, especially in the Catholic Church nowadays. So, but to go back to the topic, yes, you do need to be very careful. You do need to be very prudent, when it comes to it. And of course, also too, I did order some fitness equipment that I thought I needed for exercising. But then after a careful discernment, and of course, using it for a couple of days, I thought to myself, you know what? I don't really need it anymore. So I just packed it up and just dropped it off at the Amazon hub, and money went back into my account. So that way there I could flex that for, say, if I needed to, get myself like lunch or something during my meal, like my lunch break or something, or, put it towards, whatever. That to me is where, you have to be careful. So like, I think what was going through my mind too was, number one, I discerned, did I honestly need those dumbbells? Sure, like the therapist recommend you do that, as part of your exercise. You have to do like the bicep curls, and also like the shoulder shrug, because you do want to build your strength back. Otherwise, you're going to lose it, and you're going to be weak on the one side and then strong on the other. You want to be, strong all around. But of course, then again, I was like, I'm improving a little bit. And of course, I have to focus on my range of motion. So then now it's like, where does the dumbbell come into play? And then, you'd be like, okay, I didn't really need it, and I just send it back. And of course, you have money back in your account that you could have, like, not spent in the first place.
No, it's good to hear this, because, this is how what you're expressing to us on this podcast is how we all come to those right decisions, isn't it?
Sure.
This is how God works, when we said at the very beginning that you don't just snap your fingers and become virtuous. And you can't really just even say a quick little prayer and expect it to happen either. We have to do both. We have to pray, discern, and we have to act, right? So what you're doing is you're showing how in your cognitive self, your brain, how you're thinking it through, and how you're allowing the Holy Spirit to work so that you can make those good, prudent decisions. So I think that's an amazing thing that you're able to share that with us. And thank you. Thank you, because I think it's great for our listeners to hear that, especially those who are in those families who are having some kind of a difficulty, some kind of crisis, some kind of difficult time to make decisions and to be prudent. Now, I found something here, if I could read it, Mickey. It's from CatholicGentleman.com, which you were just talking about being a gentleman and how important that is. But they have a couple of points here on acquiring prudence I thought I could read. And the first one it says is to learn from your mistakes, that many times in life we make painful or humiliating choices. When this happens, when we can either feel sorry for ourselves or we can learn from our mistakes and gain wisdom. If we choose to learn from our mistakes, our deposit of knowledge builds up over time, providing us with a reservoir of experience that we can use to make prudent choices. So that's the first. I just want to read all three. 2 is to learn from others. If there's one lesson, the wisdom books of the scripture, wisdom, Sirach, and Proverb, is to seek to drive home. It's the importance of learning from those who are older and wiser than we are. This takes humility, but if we can borrow the experience of others to fill our prudential reservoir, it will save us from many painful lessons. And the last one is to 3, consider carefully. And when faced with a choice, we need to control our desire to leap into action and instead to carefully consider the ramifications of our choices. As St. Augustine said, practice is the companion of wisdom. I just want to tell people, if they want to go to that article, and it is geared for men, but I think it's helpful for anybody. It's It's called The Cardinal Virtues and Prudence, from CatholicGentleman.com. And it was from a few years back. It's from August 6th of 2013. But, it's great that online you can find these great articles, even if they're from, a little while back. So I didn't know if you had anything to share on that, Mickey, because don't you think it is kind of a process to acquire prudence?
It is. It's not going to happen overnight, of course, or a snap of a finger. I do want to interject one thing before we continue, actually.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book written by Samuel Guzman with a 4 by Dale Alquist, published by the Ignatius Press, called A Catholic Gentleman, Living Authentic Manhood Today. I would definitely recommend you get that book. And I think it's a perfect time to read, especially as we are navigating through the year of St. Joseph. And what a better role model, rather. I barely could speak today, but of like how to be a virtuous gentleman. And of course, you look at St. Joseph, he was a man of like little words, he's a quiet example of it. Now, granted, I don't think many men today are going to be quiet. Like, there's going to be the ones that's going to be, very vocal, when it comes to the faith. And then you have those that speak through their actions. So you have those that speak through words, but then you're going to have those that are going to speak through action. And the question is, like, how well do you speak with those actions? And that's where also prudence really come into play. And, and of course, when we look at a gentleman, he's also not just, polite, with the way he's like to, not just like to, the ladies, which I would definitely recommend that anyway, but he's also polite to not just like, not just to his family members, especially, I hope he's treating his mom well, but also treating, everyone that's around him, with respect, and of course, with chivalry.
Yeah, because you know what, Mickey, I think that's how the world is going to become a so-called better place, isn't it? I mean, when we when everybody works together and in light of God's will and the Holy Spirit too. We have to work together. Whether you're a man, women have a job too, and we also have a job to be prudent in all of our decisions, and whether they're family, work, whatever, anything to do with church or other things that we do, we have to be prudent about that. And let me just read that last part of this article from Catholic Gentleman. It says that prudence is a virtue that takes time to acquire because it governs the other virtues. It is one of the most important virtues we can possess. Choose to learn from your mistakes, learn from others, and patiently consider your choices. And before you know it, you will be on your way to becoming a more prudent person. So check that article out. As I said, the article is the Cardinal Virtues Prudence from Catholic Gentlemen. Mickey, you're a younger person yourself, and I would say you're exposed to and you talk to people who are in their 20s and 30s. And I think for younger people, especially at all ages really, but for people in your age category, would you be able to give some advice for them? Because there's all kinds of temptations, all kinds of wrong decisions, and all kinds of bad things that can come across the eyes of someone who's trying to strive for virtue and prudence. How would you think someone in their 20s or 30s can become a more prudent person, especially for our families in crisis that are listening, and they might have kids that are in that age category?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I kind of offer some nuggets, so to speak, on how to practice prudence. And one of those was the example of, ordering the exercise equipment from Amazon. Who doesn't shop Amazon these days, since they're very popular. But of course, jokes aside, I would just say some of the things you do want to say that you have to look at. I mean, granted, and of course, every now and again, especially when I travel, I try to make sure that I get I always have this thing with hotels. Like, I want a hot breakfast. I want a pool indoor. Of course, it's if I'm traveling someplace cold during the winter, I do want to have an indoor pool, so I can do a little bit of some kind of aquatic exercise, just get the blood going, and just give the joints a rest, so to speak. And the other thing too would be, I don't really put this on there, but fitness center, maybe I can just do some light workouts or whatever. Or if I can be someplace near where there's public transportation, or if I'm smack dead in the middle of where all the hustle and bustle is with the travel. That's one of the things. But at the same time too, you also have to make sure that when it's getting close to the time you're traveling, you start saving your money. So you're not going out to eat all the time. That little extra money really pays up. If you have an opportunity to pick up some extra shifts at work, do it. If you have extra money laying around, you have two choices. Give some of it to your parish, of course. I mean, they will love you to death. But just also just be careful with how you spend it. And also think too, you go on I'm just curious to see how many people go on Amazon every time they're online. They have to look at this, they have to look at that, because let's face it, Prime Day did come and pass. But I think also the reality too is, you have to ask yourself the question: do you honestly need this? Yeah, sure. Do you honestly need it? But then after you use that equipment, do you want to keep it laying around? And if you're still within that return period, maybe it won't be a bad idea. Just return it so you can get that money back and just save up for, your bills or whatever. And also just be cautious too, before you make that purchase. Do you have a bill? Do you have a pending bill coming, such as utilities, your cell phone, your cable, whatever, internet, whatever? So that way the extra money you save up, or you try to get back, assuming you're still within that refund period, that would really add up to, making the right decision. And it's also, keeping your priorities straight, such as, I like to call it the adulting kind of thing, where you're paying bills, rent, whatever it is. We've all been, I'm sure many of their listeners have been there, done that, and still are doing that. Yeah. And of
Yes.
course, also too, you have to keep in mind what has happened to you the last couple of months. Have you been injured? Are you recovering from, are you recovering from an injury whatsoever? So that's the case with me. You have to make sure you have the money set aside so you do have it ready for the medical expenses, such as your copay for when you go to therapy. Of course, they get you once a week, of course. Also keep in mind, you have the insurance, so that way there it could help you with whatever, help you with the things that it can cover before they get you out of pocket. And of course, too, it's good that you're also saving up for retirement. So after all those years of working, all that fun jazz. So that's some of the things you have to ask. So the basic is ask, is it necessary? How can I do, if you're traveling, how can I, find lodging without, overpaying, so to speak? It's great. You also, you do want to have like all the amenities at a hotel. Like you want to go swimming. You want to go to a fitness center. You do want to have a hot, a nice little a free hot meal every morning, so they could get your day going. But at the same time too, like, do you have the money to do it all? Those are the questions. And face it, and you're gonna make challenging decisions that could make the difference between your checkbook and your bank, your checkbook and helping people, get some business going. It's one of the things, you ask the questions. Two, you have we have like people my age, even younger, the college age too. They're thinking about these things they want to do, such as they want to go abroad. Like, is it worth it? I mean, granted, I didn't have that opportunity to do that in college. I mean, I wanted to, but in the end, like, I wasn't going to spend money I didn't have, and that could have put me in a hole.
That was Prudence.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Another thing too is, like, for college people, do you honestly want to go to a 4-year university, or would you rather start somewhere like a junior college, a community college, so to speak? Do your 2 years, and maybe if you have the scholarship, the financial aid, whatever, just go on and move on. But also too, what are you going to do to put the money aside for, say, if you do borrow money? Will you be ready to pay that back 6 months after graduation? Because there's Prudence. There's an example of Prudence right there.
No, they're excellent pieces of advice, because you're very much in touch with and closer to that age range for the people that are listening, who either have kids that are in that age range or they themselves. And, money does have a good bit to do with it, doesn't it? I mean,
Sure.
It really does. And I'm glad you brought that up, because people who are families in crisis, if the husband and the wife got divorced and now, money's tight. And so you're going to have to make some prudent decisions having to do with finances and things like that. So good that you brought that up, and thank you. And I know that, you and I are both families who have been affected by divorce. You are a child of divorce, and I am too. And we have experiences that have helped us to become more prudent people in those terms, right? As we've gotten older and learning about how important it is to be prudent in all aspects. So did you have anything else that you wanted to share with people that are listening right now about how to exercise it in a greater way? Now let's talk about prayer, because isn't that also a way to find the prudence to help? Now it's not a magic wand, right? I mean,
Right.
you can't just say a little prayer and it's going to happen.
Well, part of the sermon too, Anne, is, prayer. You ask for guidance, and also too, another thing with prudence too is, you ask around. You ask people, ask people for advice, so that way there you can make the best decision possible. Especially when traveling, maybe you have family that lives
say, for example, if you have family that lives in Nashville, would you rather spend the money on a hotel, or would you rather lodge with them? So that would save you a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah, all these are like little things that you can do to be more prudent, I think. And in every aspect of our lives, as we wake up in the morning, we try to make those prudent decisions that will help us to be better people, whether it has to do with money, whether it has to do with work, whether it has to do with relationships, or something to do with an activity that we partake in, or church life. There's all kinds of ways that we can find prudence. Now, let's also talk about prudence in the area of when people talk about other people, because don't you think that's also another thing that we need to be prudent when you're in a conversation and people are telling you stuff about somebody, and you don't want to get involved in that. You don't want to hear
Right.
it, and you don't want to gossip. So in your own life, how do you think, what kind of advice can you give people who are maybe families in crisis in those terms of discussions that happen having to do with other people?
Well, one of the things, you do have to be careful with your speech.
Oh,
And that's
yeah.
very important, because let's face it, there are, like, the difference between boomerangs and speeches are this: the boomerang can come back to you, but speeches you can't take back. You can take back a boomerang, but you can't take back, a speech, or you cannot even take back an object you throw, or if you're trying to shoot a gun or something, and hope you're like, no, I was trying to shoot at that person, but then there's someone that became collateral damage, or whatever the case is. So I think one of the things too, we have to be prudent, and this is not just saying like, your ex-spouse, your ex-girlfriend, ex-fiance, whatever it is, but it's also with family, friends, because we also had a wonderful episode called Honor Thy Father and Mother, because we still have to pray for them, we still have to honor them, whatever the case is.
And that's part of prudence.
For sure.
Yeah. So I think that's good. And thank you. Now, I thought before we end this podcast, Mickey, I'd love it if we can talk about what the foundation does to help families in crisis before we end, and about our own resources, because, we've been around since 2015, and that's what we are all about. We are all about helping to help families in crisis to get the help that they need when they're going through rough times, whether it's related to divorce and separation, or whether it's something else, whether it's an addiction issue, whether you have a sick parent or a sick spouse or child, whether it's a pro-life related issue. These are just some of the things that we do. So what we offer are what we call 4 Ps. The first one is prayer. And if you go to our website at nonnatus.org, there is a link there that you can send directly to me, being the director, where I will, not only will I pray about it, but I send it to our Mercedarian friars and ask them to pray for your intentions. And the next one we offer is a free 1-hour priestly consultation with Father Ken Breen, our Mercedarian friar, who's our spiritual moderator. And you can get as many appointments as you need. You could start out with 1, but if you want to do more than that, that's fine. Now, if you live in Western New York, you can actually get an in-person appointment, right? But for the most part, it's either over the phone or it's a virtual call, something like a Skype, or even like on your iPhone, you can do a video call there too. And the next thing are podcasts and videos on our YouTube channel, which you might be watching this or listening to this on our Philly Nonnatus YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe. And we have programs and events. We even had our first live event over this past summer with our guided rosary, contemplative rosary for divorced and separated Catholics in the Philadelphia area. So keep an eye on our nonnatus.org programs and events page. I just wanted to mention all those resources, Mickey, because I think it's good for people to know that we're here for them. And you know what? Everything we do is for free. And all we ask is that if somebody wants to partner with us with a donation, even on our website, we have a link there that you can make a donation to our foundation, which helps us to keep going. So we just invite you that if you'd like to make a donation, it doesn't have to be a large one either. I mean, anything that you can give, we are so appreciative. But please do share our resources with other people. So Mickey, before we end, did you have anything else to say on prudence?
Well, Ann, I think we covered everything, but let's also bear in mind too that we are going back and forth with all the things we mentioned, and let's just use prudence. Let's think of prudence as a discernment. Like, do we honestly need to have every single item in the world, try to set up our own, have our set up our own Walmart or Target or whatever with the clothes, the toys, and all this. But also too, we also have to keep in mind, maybe there comes a point where we're getting tired of going to the same place, for summer vacation, or going to the same place to eat. So maybe we want to shake things up. So you think about oh, my uncle opened a restaurant nearby. Maybe I want to go check that place, as opposed to my neighbor who has a bar a couple blocks from my house. Maybe just shake that up. And then every time, on Saturday mornings, I do this a lot. Whenever I go do my pro-life outreach, and when I'm finished, I would frequent to a Dutch eating place in Renton Terminal Market, or other times I would go to this restaurant that is around the corner from my house, and I'll go there to eat breakfast. And I would do the same thing too, probably also when I'm coming out of church for, fulfilling my Sunday obligation, of course, go there, eat, maybe kill some time. And then I would also ask the questions do I want to go for the traditional eggs and bacon, or do I want to maybe just add something else to it? Maybe oftentimes I would switch the meats up. I would still get scrambled eggs, but I also change the meats. But then oftentimes too, I would crave into one of my favorite guilty pleasures, the Belgian waffle.
Yeah.
Is anybody's mouth watering? Okay, there you go. Go for it. But also too, you also want to and it's not just with food, and also with you also have to also keep in mind too, how do we consume entertainment? So do we want to keep watching these things that probably has some very hateful messages, in the dialogue, or just in general? Or do we want to watch something that's a little more uplifting, like The Chosen?
Yes.
Watch something that infiltrates some really good moral messages. And believe me, it's out there in many of the movies that are out there in pop culture. Believe me when I tell you, there is hope out there that's available in some of the recent blockbusters and even phenomenons that have been out there in recent years from Hollywood. Every now and again, you will get it. And it's just out there. You just have to look for it. So overall, prudence is not just the way you act, but it's also with how you are prioritizing things, such as, your money, with, do you honestly want to keep going out to eat all the time? Maybe you want to make a meal yourself, or even, and also too, maybe and of course too, you also want to what is the entertainment that you're consuming these days? Or what are some of the things that you're reading? What are some of the things that you are buying? Do you want to go for something that you get more bang for your buck, or do you want to just get something that's on sale that can save you some money? So those are the things you really have to think about, before you splurge.
No, I think these are all great points of consideration when it comes to being more prudent. So Mickey, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we do have to end the podcast. We're almost out of time, but thank you again for being a guest here with me. Again, I'm with Mickey Kelly. He's the president of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. We are so grateful to him for being a part of this organization. And keep an eye, because we have 3 more podcasts in the series, all on the Cardinal Virtues. So keep an eye on the Philly Nonnatus YouTube channel, and we will see all of you next time. You'll be in our prayers. God bless.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Did you enjoy this podcast? Listen to other podcasts from Patchwork Heart Ministry by following Patchwork Heart Radio